we're so much more than our language.
Oh my God, of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. When people talk about Latinos and they think that language is what unites us, I often bring up the fact that we're a people divided by a common language, right? Hi, I'm Tony Hernandez, and this is When Zay Zay Met. And today, Zay Zay meets me.
¿Qué pasa, cómo está mi gente? I am Zay Zay, and welcome to When Zay Zay Met. Today's fun for me, man. Our guest right now, his modesty is going to prevent him from saying it, so I'm going to say it. Our guest today is a trailblazer in so many ways, right? He's a businessman, a philanthropist, a father, for sure. Currently, he finds himself traveling across the country, documenting and preserving the life stories of America's immigrant population. And as I said, yes, a trailblazer, and truly, to me, an inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, show your love. This is Tony Hernandez.
What an introduction, dude. Wow. I'm impressing myself here. This is remarkable.
You should.
Thank you for that. Very, very generous. Absolutely.
For sure. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us,
so
man.
Good to be here with you, man. It really is. Yes. An absolute treat. Thank you.
For sure. You know what? As I said, your main project right now, and truly a labor of love, I know, because I've known you ever since you started it, right? The Immigrant Archive Project, an amazing project. I'm gonna turn the tables a little bit. Probably won't be the first one to do this, but I'm gonna turn the tables a little bit and ask you, let's start from the beginning. Where are you from?
I was born in Havana, Cuba in 1962, which is sort of a precarious time to come into the world in Havana. It was just 3 years after Castro had come to power and 4 months before the famous October missile crisis, right? So I'm actually lucky to be here, to be honest with you. Odds weren't looking good when I was welcomed into the world. Yeah, the deck was a little stacked against me. Yeah.
Amazing. And then so you obviously then can be, and probably one day will be, a subject of your own project, right? Like, what is your immigrant story? How did you come to the States when you were a child, right?
Yeah, I have a pretty unremarkable immigrant story, to be honest with you. My parents are the ones with the remarkable immigrant story. I was 5 years old when we arrived here in November of '67. So it was, compared to a lot of people, we left on an airplane, right? You had the freedom flights had already been established. We were part of the hundreds of thousands of Cubans that left the island during that era. Went through my share of stuff, but pretty easy compared to most. If there was any sort of hardship and struggle on my end, it was that there were no English as a second language programs in the U.S. So, suddenly you were thrown into a class where no one spoke your language, including the teacher, and you were expected to keep up, But compared to the thousands of people that I've interviewed, it was a walk in the park. It was a walk in the park. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. So where did you guys land when you came to the States?
Okay, so we landed in Miami, but unlike most Cuban families, we basically had a cup of coffee in Miami, right? We were there, I think, maybe 2 days, and then we were reunited with my maternal grandparents, who they had escaped, I guess it was maybe 3-4 years earlier, and they fled. I want to say it was maybe 34, 35 people aboard a 22-foot boat. So they were packed in there pretty tightly, and they really went through some stuff. They were lost at sea. They were caught in a storm. They lost their rudder and their anchor, and luckily they were picked up by an American Coast Guard ship. Back when, if you were picked up, the Coast Guard would actually bring you to the U.S. as opposed to handing you back to the Cuban authorities.
Yeah.
And by then, the immigration laws signed into place under not Kennedy, under Johnson. Mm-hmm. Allowed for family reunification. So we had family here, and they went through the process of, asking for us to join them. So, that lyric in the old song, "A house out in Hackensack, is that all you get for your money?" That's where we wound up. And, I got to be honest with you, man, true to form, there wasn't much going on in Hackensack. There really wasn't. And in 67, it's not, we were one of very few Latino families in the whole area. Now when you see, this sort of Latino boom, right? I mean, we've made such an impact in society. That was the very, very early stages of that. If you alluded to the Immigrant Archive Project. I've done a lot of research in that area, as you well know.
Yeah.
The census that was released prior to our arrival, 1960, Latinos were just 5% of the total U.S. population.
Oh my gosh.
We were less than 10 million people scattered all over the U.S. Now we're better than 60 million strong today.
Right.
So it was a totally different situation than it is for a Spanish-speaking immigrant arriving on our shores today.
I can imagine it, and knowing you and knowing a little bit about your story. Sorry, guys, I cheated. This is not the first time I meet Tony Hernandez, right? But knowing a little bit about your story and growing up in the Northeast, you seem to have, because you came young, right? You came at 5 years old and you grew up pretty Americanized, but you've also been able to hold on tightly to your roots and be just as Latino as anyone that, just came from somewhere else, right? Who do you attribute that to? And how do you think your circumstance was able to kind of cater to that?
That's a really wonderful question, by the way. And I think that was equal parts my parents being very adamant about not forgetting who we are and where we come from, right? So I have a younger sister who was literally born 9 months to the day after our arrival. So I was like, okay, I know how you guys celebrated when you got here.
Baby.
Let's stop that. You guys were young and right and happy to be free. She was born here, right? So she had no sort of recollection of what life was like on the island the way I had. So, you didn't mess around with this, man. The moment you stepped foot into our apartment, it was an English-free zone. There's no English being spoken in the apartment. Once you're home, you can only speak Spanish. Which, of course, typical kids, right? We rebelled, and what is this, right? Like everything in English was so much cooler than anything in Spanish, right? But thanks to that, and them not yielding to us in any way, both of us can read it and write it, and we're fluent in both languages. So I think that played a large role. The other thing that I think was equally as important is I was fortunate enough to have been raised in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. So all of the kids, as a matter of fact, on my block, there was one American kid on my block,
oh, wow.
Dana. And Dana was known as La Americanita, right? Like if you asked any of the parents, they had no idea what her name was. She was La Americanita, and she grew up around us, and she learned how to dig our food and our music and the whole nine. And it wasn't until I want to say the beginning of my sophomore year in high school that we moved into a predominantly English-speaking America. I think I was one of 2 Latino kids in my entire high school. So I had a very strong Latino upbringing through sophomore year. And then it was like, sort of middle America from there on. And then, as you know, I went to school in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Exactly a hotbed of Latino talent, which was a blast. I loved my time there. And interestingly enough, when it came time for my own daughters, fast forward many years later, to go on to college, now that we live in Miami, I was adamant about them leaving Miami. As I said to them, Miami is basically Quebec, right? Quebec looks like nothing else in Canada. That's Miami. Okay. Miami looks more like the country I was born in than the country that you were born in. Go and discover the United States. And my 2 oldest went to Wisconsin. Yeah. They sort of relived my experience years later, which is very cool. So yeah, I would attribute being equally comfortable in both cultures to those 2 aspects of my early years.
Do you think now that we're talking about your wonderful daughters, do you think that you and your wife were able to pass that same sort of bind to Latino culture that your parents were able to give to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
150%. And it was a little bit harder for us because, as you know, my wife's American, right? So I couldn't institute a Spanish only at home because, you leave my wife out of the picture. And then I wind up sleeping on a couch for a week. That's not a good look. But we did hire, teachers to come in and work with them. Not only would they take Spanish in school, but, Mariluz would come in once a week and work with them for a couple of hours or twice a week, I think. And yeah, so, they speak the language. They understand the story. They understand the geopolitics that led to us being here in the U.S. They can all dance salsa and merengue. They can prepare Latino dishes, probably equal parts American artists and Latino artists on their playlists. Nice. So yeah, we've managed to pass that down to the next generation.
Of course, and that's what it's all about too, right? Because we're so much more than our language.
Oh my God, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're so much
when
more.
people talk about Latinos and they think that language is what unites us, I often bring up the fact that we're a people divided by a common language, right? You get a Dominican, an Argentine, a Nicaraguan, and a Cuban in the room, you got to bring in an interpreter. We speak 12 different versions of the same language, and there are only 4 of us in the room. What I really feel unites us is and it's part of why I launched this project, our immigrant experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going back to what I mentioned earlier, as recently as 1960, you could fit all the Latinos in a taxi cab in the U.S. There weren't a lot of us. So the overwhelming majority can sort of reach out and touch that immigrant in their family, right? We went from 10 to 60 plus million. So we arrived fairly recently. So I think what unites us is that, that common sort of universal immigrant experience. And then we have a lot of very, very similar values, whether, you speak one form of Spanish or Spanglish or another. Yeah. You may come from the Caribbean or from Latin America, South America. But, family and those bonds and those friendships, I think, play a very, very important role in our lives.
Continue to talk about the Immigrant Archive Project. What do you think has been the most inspirational story that you've heard?
It's that's a really, really tough question to answer honestly, because when you sit across from over 3,000 people, right, and 3,000 really remarkable people, and I don't mean just like rich and famous, there's certainly that to it, right? Yeah. But people that have had such a broad sort of spectrum of life experiences, everyone teaches you something. Everyone there really teaches you something. You have stories of tremendous sort of economic success, which that doesn't necessarily move the needle for me. I'm more interested in rich sort of stories that speak to our shared humanity more than I arrived with nothing and now I'm Elon Musk, and believe me, I've reported a fair share of I came with nothing and I am now literally a certified billionaire, right?
Right.
Billions. But they all can teach you. They all can teach you so much. What has been a prevailing thread throughout, when I ask folks to sort of reflect on that immigrant experience, right? So based on what you know now, if you had to give a newly arrived immigrant some advice, what would you say, right? Mm-hmm. And you ask that of enough people and enough very smart people, you start seeing these common threads. Yeah. And one which I think is absolutely key is don't be so quick to become someone else. Be confident in maintaining sort of be confident in not losing who you are in your desire to blend into society, right? Some of those things that previous immigrant waves that didn't have sort of our reality, right? When you look at the Irish that arrived and the Italians and the Poles and the Jews, well, they didn't have Polish television networks and radio networks. They didn't have, national media. They didn't have any of that. We've got that. There was a rush back in the day to become American, right? How do we Americanize our names, right? First thing you do, you come to Ellis Island and you had way too many consonants in your name before. Let's shorten that. Come on, Buffy,
and so unlike your family, it was like English only in a lot of these households, right? Like unlike at your house where it was Spanish only. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there was this rush to become American as quickly as possible. I think the majority of our contributions, and we've made so many, right? I mean, you can argue that this Latino, let's call it this Latino boom, right, has impacted the food Americans eat, the music we listen to, the films and television shows we watch, what earns the highest accolades on Broadway. I mean, really, across the spectrum has got our DNA all over it. And we've been able to do that by not losing sight of who we are and bringing the best of who we are to the table and watching it become embraced by the rest of society.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there somebody that is like a dream get for you that you're working towards that you definitely, I need to talk to this person and one day I'll have this person on the couch with me?
I reached out recently to Sonia Sotomayor, and understandably she's not an immigrant, right? She's Puerto Rican. But I made a conscious decision early on to interview Puerto Ricans. And people are like, why would you interview Puerto Ricans in the Immigrant Archive Project? They're not Puerto Ricans. I'm like, you know what? The day that the state of Ohio sends a basketball team to the Olympics that can compete against the U.S. team, then I'll stop interviewing Puerto Ricans. They're Americans, but they really aren't Americans, okay? They can arrive with their documentation, but for all intents and purposes, their experience is the same. They leave language, they leave culture, they leave food, they go out into the unknown. Granted, they arrive, they're citizens, but everything else is so unlike every other American, right? So based on that, I opened the sort of, widened the lens of the project and interviewed plenty of Puerto Ricans. But she would be a major get. I did reach out, and I received a beautiful note. What a wonderful project. She loves it. She's all for it. But at the moment, she's not doing any interviews. So I'm holding out hope. Maybe when she sees this broadcast, she'll be moved to.
Well, this is obviously going to be the one that's going to change the minds.
We know it.
IAP, where did you get the inspiration? I mean, I know, but I want you to tell them, where did you get the inspiration to do it?
So, listen, inspiration for the project was sort of threefold. I saw this project that Steven Spielberg launched after wrapping Schindler's List. And, the whole Holocaust thing was front and center. And he realized there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors out there every day. It's an aging population. And before we lose the last one, we should really record as many Holocaust survivor stories as we possibly can. And, the guy Steven Spielberg, right? So he put together Survivors of the Shoah, which was a beautiful, beautiful oral history project. They've recorded Holocaust survivors on every continent on the planet. It's just been a remarkable body of work. If you haven't seen it, and I'm speaking to you and our viewers, I urge you to check it out. It's just phenomenal work. So when I first saw one of these Survivors of the Shoah stories, it sort of hit me. I'm like, wait a second, I'm not comparing the immigrant journey to a Holocaust survivor. That would be a crime against humanity. But understanding that our reality, I think, merited being told and being told in our own words. So I started doing a little research on oral history projects and saw that they've been done for all kinds of groups, right? Veterans, obviously Holocaust survivors. At the same time, the conversation around immigration was taking a very negative turn, right? This was 2006, 7. I think we recorded our first interview 2008. And you would turn certain channels on cable TV, and you would see that immigrants were being blamed for everything from Ebola to, stealing people's jobs and, good crime. And again, I just leaned back on my own immigrant experience, having grown up in an immigrant neighborhood. And I said to myself, this couldn't be any further from the truth. Started, with my mom and dad and some family and friends, right? That's the beauty of it. I can reach out. And most people I know have got an immigrant story. So it started with friends and family. And, before long, we had, maybe a dozen or so interviews, and realized this is bigger than just audio, because at first it was just done on a handheld audio recorder. Yeah. So then we started shooting it. And then we're at the point now where we shoot this stuff on Red. It's all shot 5K, 2 cameras. And it's
beautifully done.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautifully done. No, for sure. It, you mentioned earlier 3,000 interviews so far, up and about, right? And no end in sight, right? As many immigrants as there are in this country, this is multiple lifetimes of stories that can be told. Correct. And that can be captured. What's your dream for it all? When it's all said and done, and you decide, I'm going to hang up my microphone for, and I'm done, or maybe pass it on. Right. Where do you want to see the Immigrant Archive Project go?
If you would have asked me that question last year, I would have said that I can finally rest once this body of work is archived at the Library of Congress, right? Because I'll tell you, when you have people willingly come on camera and spend an hour and a half, and you remember the Mexican crooner Jose Jose spent better than 2 hours with me on camera, wow. Talking about his entire life story. So when you have thousands of people willing to sort of, open their kimono, literally bleed for you on camera, right, and tell you their story. And these are very, very cathartic conversations, by the way. Yeah. This isn't just, chronologically, let's follow it. No, we get into the weeds, Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed that have asked for a full copy of the interview once we wrap. And by now I know where they're coming from. So I always ask them, but why would you want a whole copy? And 99.9% of the times they'll say, because we talked about issues that I've never mentioned to my husband or my wife, or my kids don't know about XYZ that I just shared with you on camera. So when you get that level of cooperation, you literally feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, in that you have to do something meaningful with this material, right? Sure. It can't just sit on a website and a few hundred people go watch it and it's done. You really need to do something meaningful. So from the beginning, I've always sort of had this vision of, wow, if we could bring this into the Library of Congress, and once it's archived there, it's there in perpetuity, right? Like your great-grandchildren's grandchildren can go watch it. Right. And about 2 months ago, I received an email to whom it may concern, which is kind of, at first I'm like, is this a goof? Is this for real? The Library of Congress, that they had discovered the website, and that they had they had deemed the work to be of cultural and historical importance to the nation. And yeah. With my permission, they wanted to archive it in perpetuity. So it happened, not through any work of mine. I didn't bang any doors down in DC. It sort of happened on its own. So yeah, that's very cool.
It is incredibly cool. And it's something that you need to take. I mean, of course you're taking the win, right? But you're also being a bit, it happened or whatever. You're being a little modest. The truth of the matter is the work speaks for itself, right? If you go to the site and you just start clicking around and start watching some of these interviews and start really just, internalizing what you're watching. It is exactly what you said you wanted it to be when you told me about it all those years ago, right? It is an essential digital Ellis Island, right? So a thousand, hundreds of years from now, when people are doing their, genealogy or their chronology or their whatever, they can quite literally watch their great great grandfather tell his story. Imagine being able to do the same thing with George Washington and being able, for anybody out there, or, with Simon Bolivar or somebody, like being able to watch and listen to them tell their story.
And you're absolutely right, man. That is so powerful. Having done this as long as we have, there are a number of people that we documented their stories and they're no longer with us, right?
Right.
And when you hear from their family members to say, just being able to go back, hit click, and hear my brother or my father or my son, in some cases, hear their voice again, and hear what was important to them in their life. This is very, very powerful, very powerful. But to finish answering your question, sort of what's next. The way I look at it, sort of metaphorically, right? We've been concentrating on documenting the stories of those born abroad that have emigrated to the U.S., right? So the way I look at it, sort of my back has been to the nation, focused on those that are coming across our borders to tell their remarkable story.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in doing now is in sort of shifting the focus. And now I'm going to be facing the nation with my back to the borders. And I hope to tell the story of how this immigration boom post-1965 has changed the nation. Correct.
So at the same time documenting these stories.
Not necessarily through these stories, looking factually at how the nation has changed, right?
I see.
The country was 85% white prior to this 1965 legislation.
Yeah.
In prior to 65, when you would speak about minorities or diversity, it was a black and white issue.
Yep.
There weren't enough Asians. There weren't enough Latinos. Anyway, I've told you, Asians were 1% of the nation back then. There are more Chinese restaurants in the U.S. than McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, and Wendy's combined.
Oh my gosh!
Happened fairly recently, right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought back in the day that we'd see a Super Bowl show with the entire halftime show being Latino? Never.
That's true.
We were on some crappy station off the grid.
Yeah.
Back then it was SIN before it was even Univision. Half the commercials were the English language commercials sort of dubbed into Spanish. It looked like a bad Godzilla movie,
Oh, wow.
So we've come a long way. And you've seen all the stats, right? Like, the U.S. consumes more solid Southern ketchup. You've seen all of those statistics. Well, that was part and parcel to this Latino boom. So I want to sort of document that next and show how it literally, it changed our, what we view as our sports heroes, right?
Yeah.
When you thought of great baseball players prior, that was Joe DiMaggio. It was Mickey Mantle,
Yeah.
Now these guys look like more like younger versions of us, right?
Right.
You're hard pressed to see a baseball team without a bunch of Z's at the end of the names of their jersey. So yeah, and that contribution, and I've done a lot of research on this. That contribution has been overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly.
Of course. What do you think is the largest, in your opinion, after obviously speaking to so many people and being part of the culture yourself, what do you think is the biggest misconception about Latinos in general in the United States by, let's say, Anglos?
I think the biggest misconception, and it's not just Latinos, right? I think the biggest misconception about the other, and the other in previous generations were Italians, Irish. You go back, far enough, it was the Germans,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I can show you uh, writings attributed to Benjamin Franklin warning about this German wave. That they're hanging German signs in their businesses. They're teaching kids in school how to speak German. There'll never be Americans like us. Well, more Americans trace their lineage to Germany than any other country.
Oh my
So
gosh.
they weren't a problem.
Yeah.
Italians and Jews at one point weren't considered white in this country. Weren't. They were considered a mongrel race.
Mm.
Yeah. You talk about no Spanish. There were signs in storefronts in New York and in Boston that read Nina, 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 and Nina stood for no Irish need apply.
Oh
Looking for work, keep it moving. This isn't the place for you. So it's wave after immigrant wave that those that are here feel that they're better than it, right? That they're better educated, that these folks will never become American. They're going to bring in crime. They're going to bring in problems. They're going to take our jobs. They're going to, marry our children, God forbid.
Right.
But here's the thing that I always struggle with, right? So you would think by now we would have broken that cycle, right? And we haven't. So how do the children and grandchildren of previous waves that were also met with resistance become the resistors of the next wave, right? So if we're not careful, our kids or our grandkids could become the oppressors of whatever is the next immigrant wave to arrive on our shores. We know they're going to come, right? At least we hope so, right? If they don't come, it's because we've, upended our society and it's not worth finding work and moving to the U.S. This is no longer sort of a beacon of freedom and opportunity. Hopefully it will continue to be that. So it will always draw people from other countries. So how do we prevent Latino children in the next generation from becoming the oppressors of wherever they're going to come from? Because we know they're going to come, right?
Do you think it's human nature, or do you think it's like learned behavior that can be unlearned with education?
The answer is yes to both questions. It is. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. It's in our DNA, right? That's what enabled our group, our tribe to survive, right? We were leery of another tribe because in many cases it did want to come in and take everything that we have and kill us and whatever. So it's very basic sort of caveman stuff. But when you look at the societies, the towns, the cities, the clusters that are the most anti-immigrant in the country, those are the places that have next to no immigrant population. Where people are so accepting is Queens, New York. You never hear Americans in Queens bitch about immigrants. Probably has the highest immigrant population. You know why? Because they know Juan down the block's a good dude. Yeah. They know that the Asian guy down the corner wants the same thing for his children that you and I want for our children. So yes, I think it's in our DNA, but I think it can be also, eradicated through education, right?
You're so right about that. Like when you look at the country and you see, there's a reason that most of the major populated areas of our country are, essentially, not to turn this necessarily political, but there's a reason they're all blue, right? And that's when you get a bunch of different people in one place, empathy tends to take hold, right? Understanding what your neighbor's going through, what your upstairs neighbor and your downstairs neighbor are going through, and being able to sort of have that camaraderie of your situation. And
correct.
And you're right, like the further out you go and the more isolated people become, the more it reverts to the caveman. Oh, they're gonna come and take my
correct.
stuff, right?
Correct. And and with that comes the issue of being in a very solid majority, right? When you're 80% of the community, you don't need to negotiate with anybody, right? Whatever you want is what goes. We're in the majority. I think as we move closer to no majority in the nation, where it's going to be a majority minority nation, right? Where you're going to have a large group of Latinos, a large group of non-Hispanic whites, a large group of African Americans. Well, guess what? At that point, I can't force my views on you. You can't force your views on me. We need to sit at a table and negotiate. We're going to get some things that we want. We're going to have to trade off some things that maybe we don't want. But I think that will wind up being a much more democratic society.
And that's so important. And I think that projects like yours, it helps to bring information to those rural places, you know, and the first thing we got to do is let them know that it exists. That's so much why I wanted to have you on, right? To just continue to spread your amazing word. But then also, you know, once they watch, then maybe, just maybe, a little bit of that empathy will seep into their hearts and they'll understand that it's not just about me. Somebody in New York City living in the Bronx on the third floor of some, you know, some tenement building has the same wishes, hopes, aspirations for their families that I have for mine, living, you know, somewhere in the rural areas of Wisconsin, let's say, right?
Correct. You nailed it. You nailed it. The issue there is empathy. And Maya Angelou nailed it, right? We are much more alike than we are unalike, right? Mm-hmm. That's really the basis of it all.
That's it.
Right. That is the basis of it all. Yeah.
That's it. My gosh, Tony, man, you continue to inspire me every day. I appreciate you. I appreciate all your diligence, your hard work, your persistence, right? Because this is not only a labor of love, but it is a labor of time. You have been doing this for a while, 3,000 plus interviews, and now we're going to take the camera and turn it inward. And I can't wait to see the next chapter, my brother. I can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to have fun shooting that for sure. For sure. And thank you for having me on, man. What a treat just to be able to hang out and chit chat with you on camera. That was great.
Yeah, we got to do it more often.
Whenever you want.
Bring it back once a month.
I'm going to get this year, though, man. I can't let you upstage me like that. That's crazy. I got to get me one of these.
All right. Se te quiere, Papa.
Right,
I appreciate you.
All right.
Have a great day. Thanks. Bye. Thank you all so much for watching When Zay Zay Met. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be notified when we upload more conversations with celebrities and other interesting people. Now, if you'd like to see your favorite celebrity on the show, it's simple. Just tell us who that is by leaving us a comment down below. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Hasta la próxima. Lo quiero del corazón.